Welcome back to the Marketing Moment with DB Dynamo. Every week we talk about e-commerce, direct-to-consumer, digital advertising strategies, and sometimes it's one of those things, sometimes it's all of those things. And as we talk about in all of our episodes, we as a team are a digital marketing agency focusing on e-commerce, specifically for brands that make products for the brand and the body. So unofficially, if your customers learn it, eat it, or wear it, we help you sell it. And one of the things that we want to talk about, we haven't really talked about a lot on this podcast yet, is the part about learning, because it may not be a logical fit into the e-commerce world, but when we went through this rebrand, we decided that higher education was something we had a great experience in, and we recognized that it was a part of who we wanted to continue to be into the future. So it's an interesting line because, as we mentioned, the brain and the body for products that we would sell direct to consumer or advertising for clients who are selling those products is one thing. And then education doesn't seem to fit as obviously into it. But one of the things that we're going to talk about at length today is how they probably are more related than you might think. And especially in this era of highly competitive recruiting processes, not just for undergraduate students, but also in master's programs that are becoming hyper niche as the time goes by. Whereas, for example, we're going to talk about master's programs today. Once upon a time, you used to be able to get an MBA, and that was the nebulous, all-encompassing, master's degree in business. And now there's so many different individual disciplines, and all that points to what we'll talk about a little bit more. And that is, you need to have a really robust digital strategy that matches a lot of what you would see in e-commerce, and your ability to reach the right people at the right time and develop maybe a lifelong relationship, because there's a part of it where you're trying to get them into the program, and then the part of it where you're trying to retain them so that they're giving back to the school and participating in alumni events and things like that. But we think it makes a lot of sense for e-commerce marketers as well to understand, because I think you can learn a lot from both industries in either direction. So I've said more than I should have about today's topic, but we will get there in just a moment. Before we do, your favorite, dearest friend, Nicole Williams, our BFF, is going to take you through our digital dash, which, as you know, are the top headlines that we're seeing in digital and social media at today. So Nicole, tell us what you got.
Yeah, so we have two headlines today. Pinterest marks our first headline. This one comes from Ad Age. So the headline reads, Pinterest merges e-commerce and creator content. So this is kind of like a competitor product to TikTok posts and essentially Instagram Reels. However, Pinterest announced that creators can make their idea pins shoppable, earning commission from products they help sell while forging brand partnerships. Quick backstory, Pinterest will not take any percentage of the sale, and then all deals will occur directly between the creator and the brand. Pinterest has also added disclosures of sponsored content. That's something that we've talked about in past podcast episodes, where creators are under fire for not disclosing whether or not a post is sponsored. Again, and this is something that platforms have done recently to really just kind of hone in and crank down on what they're doing in terms of regulating that influencer content. The last point of this headline is the feature is currently in beta and will roll out to all US and UK business accounts within the next few months. What are your guys' thoughts on this one?
I have several, and I'll let Julia chime in, of course, too, but it's Pinterest is always the last one to the dance. It's fascinating to me that they have, and I don't know if it's as true now, but a few years ago, there was enough sufficient data that showed per customer, per transaction, that Pinterest was the most profitable social media channel out of any of them. Now, granted, when you bring it to scale and compare it to a Facebook or an Instagram, it doesn't compare. But dollar for dollar, person for person, Pinterest has been a real value for a long time. But they get in their own way all the time by taking until the middle of 2021 to roll out a beta test of something like this. It was the most shoppable platform before shopping was a normal thing to do on social media, and they were the pioneers. So I think it's, duh at this point. I don't want to applaud them. I think it's kind of like, why were you taking so long? And with respect to the great talented people who work at Pinterest, I also think one of the downsides is that they have not invested as well into agency and client partnership support as a lot of other brands have in that space. So the Facebooks and even to a smaller extent, the LinkedIns of the world have really good sales people and people who are, also serving as client managers for brands and agencies, as I'd mentioned. Pinterest has really struggled. And like I said, I don't mean to talk badly about anybody, but a lot of the times the support that we get from Pinterest, brand support and even sales teams don't know as much about the product as we do as marketers. And we don't use Pinterest a ton for a lot of our clients, not because we don't have the visibility, but it's just become a deprioritized channel for a lot of them for a lot of reasons. They can't get their act together when it counts. So I don't mean to make this a rain on the parade of Pinterest. This is a good thing, but if they're really going to make this thing work, they've got to dedicate a type of intentional focus to it that they have not to other products in the past. But it is still a good thing. Julia, anything to add?
I think what I've seen on TikTok has been the rise of the micro influencer, particularly in fashion. And a big chunk of the strategy that I see these micro influencers sort of teaching other micro influencers is the utilization of Pinterest to kind of expand their brand. Because when you see these micro influencers who just have a niche on TikTok or just on Instagram, I don't think they're as valuable. And I think with so many micro influencers, you have to make yourself stand out. And so if these, like generally young women can utilize this new tool from Pinterest to make themselves more marketable, more profitable for brands, then I think it's a great opportunity. And I think that the micro influencers who jump on this will stand out from the other ones and move faster.
That's what yes, and to add that last little bit, because it's kind of insightful. Many moons ago when I was blogging, fashion blog back in the day, a lot of the research that I did, it did show that Pinterest was the #1 driver of traffic, and it still continues to be for a lot of retail brands, including influencer brands. So you have that longer shelf life of content. People can still rediscover it because of all the content that lives on Pinterest and just kind of the way it's displayed. So I think it'll be interesting to see a new transition into, again, kind of like TikTok mini videos, the Reels type videos. And their shelf life again, because you can always come back and like see it. But I will say it does continue to be the top producer of traffic for a lot of people's websites and just to convert to sales. So it should be interesting. That's the last piece I have on that, which takes us to our next story, which is LinkedIn holds a third of all US B2B digital display ad revenue. This article comes from eMarketer. So apparently in 2020, I'm so saying 2021, total ad revenue on LinkedIn grew 31.3%. In the coming years, professional networking site will continue to see US display ad spending increase from 1.29 billion in 2020, holding on to a little over 1/3 of US B2B digital display ad revenue. Good news for LinkedIn. These sales are driven by ad types made available through LinkedIn Marketing Solutions self-service dashboard, campaign manager, including sponsored content, in-mail, lead generation, and more. These are direct quotes, so forgive me for my awkward pausing during all these commas with this direct quote. But what are your guys' thoughts on this one?
That's good. We appreciate that because that means you don't miss any details. So it's very comprehensive. I think this is actually a perfect segue to the topic that we have today about higher education, because LinkedIn has all of the things that a lot of the other channels do at a basic level, right? So you have the ability to put a pixel on a site and retarget. You can do custom audiences and lookalike audiences and things like that. So all of those basics are already in place. But what LinkedIn does better than anybody anywhere is the ability to find individuals and organizations by name. And sorry, when I say individuals, you can't find a specific person by name, for example. So I can't type in Nicole Williams or Julia Reynolds and serve an ad to them individually. But what it does allow me to do is find their company of employee. In this case, if I wanted to find, digital marketing agencies in a certain market at a certain size, I could find DB Dynamo. I could find another agency like ours and therefore find those types of employees. That becomes a really powerful way to do account-based marketing. And it doesn't empower people to make smarter decisions about how they do it. It just means they can reach the right people. And then the tactics, I guess, are up for debate in terms of who's effective at it. But this doesn't surprise me. And in fact, I think Pinterest has an opportunity to roll out even more capabilities through its ad platform. And it's also a premium service. So we have used B2B marketing through LinkedIn in the past for several clients and higher ed clients as well. And we always know to expect to pay more for the actions that we're going to get on LinkedIn versus, Facebook, for example, as a comparison side by side. But we also know that the value and the quality of the targeting, the person that we've reached, there tends to be two things. Number one, a more accurate find, the person that more accurately fits your target market. But also two, is because of the professional mindset that users are like that are carrying with them when they log into LinkedIn, there's a higher degree of intent and focus. Whereas, Facebook is, as an example, or Instagram or whatever, these are all discovery channels that are usually used for diversions. But LinkedIn, people are going usually for edification professionally, either for a networking purpose or to learn from peers in their own industry or other industries and things like that. So the mindset is a little bit different, and therefore the intent is a little bit different. So I'm telling you things that have nothing to do with how much money LinkedIn has been making, but nevertheless, because of those qualities, I think LinkedIn is still in a prime position with very little competition. They've got a pretty big moat around them, where there are a few other players that can do what it is that they do. And for as established and longstanding as that channel has been, I still think of LinkedIn as an emerging platform for a lot of brands and a lot of organizations. And so this is perhaps the greatest evidence in a while that that's really starting to catch on at a greater level of consciousness by brands and marketers.
Which brings us to our main segment. So thank you, David. So if you want to kind of kick that off as well, you can do that.
Absolutely. So we, as we mentioned at the top of the show, are here today to talk about higher education marketing and the solutions that work best in this space. That's a pretty nebulous, all-encompassing topic. I recognize that, and it's kind of by design. So we could pinch off a specific subset, but for today, we're really going to talk about it a little bit more holistically, because the higher education space, and I explained why it is, at the beginning that we're talking about it, but it's a very, very competitive space for all the reasons that I mentioned as well. But it's unique in the sense that there's a long lead time well, let's refer to the difference in two groups first. There's undergraduate marketing in higher education, and then there's postgraduate marketing in higher education. The two of them are very different. And I think for the purposes of today's conversation, you're going to hear us talk a little bit more about master's programs because they're a little bit more specialized, and the tactics are a little bit more specialized too. But because of the volume of content that's out there and the competition for good students and things like that, there's also a big lead time. So let's talk about the master's programs in particular. When someone on average is looking to get into a master's program, the average nurture time is around 9 months from them to decide that they're interested in a program to the point where they might actually be enrolling or being accepted into one. And that's before they, even step foot into a classroom. So you're talking about a 9-month process where there's awareness, there's education, there's consideration, there's a lot of competition, and then they actually, apply, get accepted to a program or something like that. Which means the biggest key difference between that and e-commerce, and the reason I'm even drawing a comparison between the two is because we're an e-commerce agency, and you've listened to us for those reasons. But that long lead time lends itself to a lot of things that are really critical that e-commerce marketers can learn as well. The relationship building that happens through content marketing and lead nurture in the higher education space is perhaps unrivaled by a lot, by many industries. Perhaps the automotive industry, you could argue, has a similar obstacle, but I have not seen them as true content marketers, or even I don't see a ton of innovation at the marketing level for automotive in general. But when you think of that behavior, you have to get their attention, and then you have to hold it for a good period of time, get them familiar with the type of program that's right for them, and integrate very closely with on-site support teams and things like that. So just because an ad tells you that this is a great program, if you're going to pay $100,000 for a master's program, you're going to want to have your hand held with white glove service by somebody on the other side of that too. So it involves integrating really important messaging and content at the advertising level, and then finding ways for the universities to support that effort internally as well, with recruitment teams that sit down and schedule times with prospective students and getting them to engage with alumni. So I'm going to start at that very surface level, just kind of talk about the space agnostically, right? I'm making a lot of generalizations in here. But Nicole and I in particular had an opportunity to work for a couple of years on a pretty large university in their master's programs. The University of Miami College of Business at the time is what it was called. And we were responsible for the marketing of their master's programs and partner with another agency that handled all the creative. But we did all of the digital side of things, of the ad tracking, constructing landing pages, deploying all those ads and the assets and things like that, and then making sure that lead forms and lead pages were all set up to work very seamlessly with the university. So we're going to tell you a little bit about our experience and the case study that we're frankly very proud of, because it worked for a school that for 6 years was flat to negative in terms of new enrollments and new revenue, so to speak. We were able to see pretty significant jumps on all of the metrics that they were looking at to objectively measure success. So before I get tired of my own voice, or before you do, Nicole, I'm going to have you in particular. Are there any quick anecdotes or any things that you recall that you would like to share before we dive into a little bit about this case study?
Yeah, of course. I would say definitely the audience targeting for these types of programs is key. Obviously, if you're kind of targeting undergrad, you're really targeting in these campaigns parents, right? Because you need to target the right person who's actually going to be paying the tuition for the college, and depending on what type of kind of school it is it a state school? Is it an Ivy League school? Is it a private college? So based on kind of our experience, we were targeting people that would have likely a higher tuition to pay because it was such an elite program, right? It was University of Miami. So that said, I definitely think it's something to narrow in on, as well as depending on if it's like a professional master's degree versus, I don't know, like a healthcare executive MBA, things like that. Like there's so many different facets. So kind of going back to higher ed and it being a graduate program, these people likely are already professionals. So you know that kind of finding yourself or working with a platform like LinkedIn where you can get that placement with professionals or get that ad delivery where professionals are looking at it is definitely key. And I think that's kind of the driver of this conversation today, if anything.
Yeah, and that's actually a really smart point, because you're right. The undergrad students, and we have to make some generalizations, but you're right. The parents are very big role players in that decision for most college students, because for two reasons. One, maybe the parents themselves were college graduates, and they have some perspective and insight that they can obviously pass on to their children. And even if that's not the case, a lot of parents of college students are going to foot at least some portion of the bill, and they have a vested interest in making sure that that investment is one that's well placed, and that their child is getting a return on their experience as well. So, but it does lend itself to what we're talking about with the master's programs, especially now in 2021. A lot of programs had virtual components even prior to COVID because of the behaviors and lifestyles of the types of students that they're trying to get. Miami is a specific instance, is a very unique one, because it's unofficially been labeled the gateway to the Americas for the past 30 or so years, because of its unique positioning right near the Caribbean and South America, but also as a destination for, again, generalizations, but a lot of Chinese students come to Miami as an obvious international destination, and then even a lot of Eastern European countries, or at least in our experience, we saw a lot of students coming from there. So obviously there's two components: people who are going to come and be residents in these programs, and also those who are doing hybrid programs. So like an international master's program, which were some of the ones we marketed, needed to have the ability for students to come from certain feeder markets to be students at this program, but they would only be there once every quarter for in-person, and the rest of it would be online. So as an example, and we'll go through this case study in a second, but what we had to find was, what were the markets that generally the program was pulling students from, and what did they have in common? One of the things that we discovered a while ago was, if it didn't have a direct flight to Miami, it was probably not a good feeder market for the program. Because if you are going once even every couple of months for an extended weekend where you're just working for 3-4 straight days, and then you get back on the airplane and go to work on Monday or Tuesday, it's exhausting to not have a direct flight as one of the the perks, so to speak. And that became a part of our messaging in that specific program, was finding the pain points. If you can understand why someone is what they're trying to solve for in the first place, higher education, greater learning, but also what are the logistical obstacles to them getting the achievement that they're looking for, you've got to find ways to combat those things. So a lot of different motivators, as we talked about, and rather than just kind of talk around them, I think what we'll do is get here, into the case study at a high level, and Nicole and I will kind of talk through some of these anecdotes as they relate to the broader theme here. So when we came on, we were responsible for marketing 13 master's programs, and they, generally speaking, fell under 3 umbrellas. So there were one 2-year business masters that were specialized master's programs. So we're talking about your Master of Finance, accounting, taxation, business analytics, health administration, leadership, which was a new one. They also had a professional MBA, which lent itself to what we were talking about before, is your executives who are working in the specific market there in Miami, who have day jobs, who are not taking, full-time breaks in order to get into this program. They've got regular jobs and they're doing this at night. A global executive MBA, and then they also had an accelerated full-time MBA and a 2-year full-time MBA as well. So 1 and 2-year programs. Then there's the MBA programs. You're going to see some overlap between those. We mentioned what those MBA programs are. And then the executive MBAs, which we mentioned, are higher level, SVP, C-level types of individuals who are graduating, pun intended, perhaps, to a different type of seat in their professional lives. So that's where we began. And as we mentioned, because of Miami's position in the gateways of the America, cumulatively across these programs, we were advertising in the US, Europe, Asia, Latin America, and China to a smaller extent, but the language too. We were doing English, Spanish, and Portuguese in particular for Brazil, which was a big feeder market for some of these programs. And the arsenal of platforms for ads. So if you are used to listening to our podcast here, you probably know that we have a lot to say about the different ad channels that we advertise on. And ding, 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 one of the ones that showed up very effectively and consistently for us, we talked about at the top of the program, LinkedIn. It was a huge driver for us. And we had great opportunities to target. Let's think of a master's of accounting, for example, right? No other channel is as effective at targeting somebody, for example, who works at KPMG, who has a certain type of job title. Like, that you're going after a certain level of accounting professional with a certain level of experience who might be a great program fit for a master's in accounting. So LinkedIn was huge, huge, huge for us. We also advertised on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram in particular was great for students who had very recently finished their bachelor's degrees and were looking to continue their education shortly thereafter. And so that was a great program and target for us. Bing and Google. I know a lot of people are not talking about running big Bing campaigns, but the reality is it's a viable search channel that a certain amount of people use, and it ends up being less expensive. So we were there, Google ads as well, and YouTube. YouTube was very effective for us in terms of delivering long form content in video. And we know that students in the middle of the consideration funnel, right? They're aware of the programs, they're interested in them. YouTube becomes very powerful to start telling alumni stories and current student stories in long form video in front of a captive audience. And so that was really powerful to us as well. So any thoughts on that, Nicole? I know you obviously were very active in planning and placing ads for a lot of these campaigns. Anything that really stuck out to you where you were maybe surprised or just kind of reinforced things that you already knew that were effective for us as we ran these campaigns?
If anything, I would say it was more so the evolution of kind of what LinkedIn was trying to help us produce and promote at the time. Again, like, our industry changes so quickly. I feel like now, like, this is something that we might get into later in the episode, but streaming services will be really important. That's not something that was top of mind 2 to 3 years ago when we were on this account. But I will say that LinkedIn definitely did its best to continue to make the ad products that would help kind of produce the sales funnel and move it along. For example, they had content downloads, which was a new feature towards the beginning of 2019. So you can have your own brochures and white papers for your actual school, for your program. You can implement on this channel and just kind of launch it. And it could be, whether it was through a lead form or a sponsored post, they had different types, again, of ad products where they were constantly developing it and constantly evolving it. But that's pretty much, I don't know what I have for that. I would say, again, I think that the industry itself is evolving still. And with all the new channels, it could be a more omni-channel strategy as time goes on.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we started to see evidence of that, later on, as we mentioned what we have here. And frankly, there were a lot of channels that we wanted to include into the mix that for all marketers, there's always a budgetary consideration. So you have to create some sort of priorities. But podcasts, as an example, are a fantastic opportunity, I think, for universities and a lot of organizations. It doesn't necessarily matter. And I've been high on podcasts for a while because they are some of the most captive audiences that you can think about who are consuming a type of content. let's say the average podcast episode is around 30 minutes. I know that's generally the case for us. And a lot of the ones that you as a listener probably listen to on your own are in that ballpark, right? But you're focused, like you listen to the whole thing a good chunk of the time, you're going to consume the content. And if you can find a good example where your messaging integrates to the broader theme, if you're talking about people who are listening to an entrepreneurship podcast and you're advertising a master's for entrepreneurship, like, hello, that's a no-brainer and a great fit and an awesome opportunity to get positive mind association with a program that you really enjoy, with a program, a marketing program or a business program that chose to advertise on that podcast is great association with that as well. But we won't belabor that point too much. Another big theme here was, so yeah, we obviously picked a couple no-brainer channels, so we don't necessarily deserve a ton of credit for that. But where we started to show our strength was utilizing a lot of data. And actually, before I move in there, I will say them being in digital in general was a big stretch. A lot of master's programs are still, and even were a couple of years ago, relying heavily on direct mail and a lot of traditional types of marketing efforts. It's not to say those things don't have a place, but digital allows for a better usage of existing data to reach the right people in the right places at the right time. If you have the abundance of resources to do both, then God bless. But if you don't, digital becomes a much better value proposition in that regard. And that's where we really leveraged the data that we had to make digital justifiable. So we had 4 input sources of data at the time. First party data, such as previous student demographics and geos and program information that they studied. Second one was first party contact data for previous program registrants and applicants. So just because you maybe applied for a program before or decided to opt out of actually enrolling, or maybe you requested more information at some point, but didn't go through with an application, you still sit in a database as somebody who's raised their hand previously and said, I'm interested. So it's a great opportunity to go back into the well, so to speak, and pull these people back out and see if you can dust them off and entice them with some interest in the program. And then the last two, and this has become a little bit harder to come by in the iOS 14 timeline of things, but third-party data from third-party sites such as MBA.com and GMAT test registrants. The GMAT is changing. The test itself is not changing, but for a lot of schools, it's going away. The GRE is going away too. So a lot of these filters are disappearing, but nevertheless, for a period of time, it was a great measuring stick to find out who was ready to go into a master's program. So you use that data and you can leverage it to market your own students. And then the last one, perhaps the most obvious, is someone has been on a specific page on your website looking for a specific program. You have an opportunity to retarget them with program-specific messaging. And so we took a huge advantage of that, especially as we built out custom unique landing pages for every program, which had not previously been done. All of the programs, of course, are listed on the main website, but it becomes pretty difficult to navigate through that whole sea and just get the information that you need. Landing pages are incredibly powerful for that, but they were underutilized in higher education, and I think they still are. So we had an opportunity to build on that too. And with that data allowed us to build the following audiences. So maybe some no-brainers. You target the profiles and audience that are segmented for each program by age, by gender, previous education, interests, and locations. It becomes very powerful to know where your people are and how they're behaving. Also, people who were in your program before, you can find lookalike audiences of them, agnostic of any of the other stuff. You don't need to know necessarily where they are. You just need to know they behave like your former students do when they're online. Obviously, with the third-party stuff from MBA.com, we knew that they were in market because they were taking the tests, and remarketing, retargeting, whatever you want to call it, was also a no-brainer because people had demonstrated an interest in a program, but maybe they hadn't made a contact yet, and that became obvious as well. So when we talked about Google, we used a lot of really interesting display banners in color schemes too that were a little bit more unique. We have all seen the advertising for higher education, not just undergrad, but master's programs too, where you have every nation represented of students in all different hued skin tones hanging out together under a tree holding their books in their hands. And it looks like the same university every time, everywhere, under the same tree. And it's wallpaper. I know I've referenced that a lot, but no, everyone knows those students aren't hanging out together, and everyone knows that those students are on a stock library somewhere on the internet. So we had an opportunity to really create some unique University of Miami branded assets that had some really bold color schemes that stuck out. And we also use those display banners. Again, display is taught to be ignored. So you about have like a half a second if someone's ever going to notice it and pay attention. So you got to get something quick that will get that attention. A couple examples. We ran a display banner that said only 1 out of 6 schools in the nation receives triple accreditation. We're one of them. Okay, I can read that quickly, and that sticks out to me. For the healthcare executive MBA, we said 40 years of educating the best health executives in the industry. Right? We're just trying to get a couple things that are going to get their attention at the very top and keep moving. We use social media ads, as I'd mentioned before. We found that social was really good at driving action and reaction. So we put some longer form data nuggets like the ones we just mentioned in our social ads. So we talked about healthcare, right? One of our examples of an ad there was calling out that healthcare expenditures are approaching 20% of the US economy as a whole, and that the demand for highly trained leaders who can successfully navigate the rapidly changing industry has never been stronger. And then posing the question to the target user, are you one of those leaders? I've always found that posing questions as an engagement hook is really powerful, because it might seem like a small little tactical thing, but all of a sudden you go from reading something that has information in it to something that is speaking to you individually. And those little details and nuances made a difference to us. We had the data to back it up. So examples like that, we used a little bit longer form content, and we use search ads too. Again, we're glossing over a couple of things as well, but this became really powerful for some obvious reasons. Anybody who's looking in search has a degree of intent and awareness, especially when you build the right keyword program to go after what those search terms are. So we leveraged responsive search ads. They're pretty ubiquitous now, but a few years ago, they were a little less so. And it allowed us to find ads that would speak to exactly what it is the person was searching for. But the keywords that we were using were also specific to showing intent. So we didn't want somebody who was looking to, to study for the GMAT, for example, right? Like they're a little too far away from where we are. We were looking for people who are looking for global executive MBA programs or University of Miami Business School programs by name, or ones in specific markets and things like that. And we also utilized search retargeting to find those people as well. And we did multiple different match types on keywords, which I can bore you with another day: broad match, exact match, negative keywords, those sorts of things too. This one I wish I could actually show you, but our landing pages were, as I'd mentioned before, were really powerful. Bold colors, which in fact, we even surprised the University of Miami Business School leadership by showing them that these colors existed inside their approved brand standards. And the reason they were so shocked is because no one had used them in at least 20 years. So we had some fluorescent pinks and some brighter greens, just as an example, but they were quick. And we also know that on mobile sites, which is where a lot of traffic is happening for everybody, that you want to have the form and all the most important information above the fold. But like basically when the screen shows up, you don't want to have them move their thumb to get to the important stuff. So we had lead forms that were very quick. We didn't ask you to put in your blood type and your birthday and all this other extraneous crap. You just had to put in the pertinent information, and then you got the information. We also had the Miami Advantage on each of these, which were like 5 different key points with graphics that talked about the highlights. And boom, like the landing page was succinct, clear, and concise, but it had most of the information you needed. And the landing pages converted so much better than the main website did, for obvious reasons. It was concise. No one wants to read stuff that's extra and unnecessary if they don't have to. And in the end, this is the part we'll pat ourselves on the back for, is we delivered. Talked about the fact that for 6 years prior, the program was flat or negative in terms of enrollment. The thing that we love the most, over a course of a 2-year period, we increased cumulative program enrollment by 34%, did 12% in that first year as we rolled things out. And once we got our footing, up 20% in the second year. So 32%, or rather, I guess 32 is the number, sorry, in aggregate over the course of 2 years. On top of that, because of the digital tactics that we talked about and the way that we targeted users more effectively, we reduced ad waste. And in doing so, the blended cost per lead, a documented cost per lead, was down 43% from the year prior to us taking over. And basically it was from $185 to $95. So a substantial drop, meaning not only are you getting more enrollments, but you're doing it more effectively dollar for dollar than you were. And on top of that, much as we think we're great marketers, we know that not just everybody we reach will be so compelled that they want to enroll tomorrow. We know that some people are going to be aware, but they're going to defer their interaction or their sign up or whatever the case is. And what happened is we gave them and left them with a database of people who were interested, but could also be marketed to and nurtured to over the next couple of years to join these programs. 19,000 qualified leads in a 2-year period, and that eclipsed the lead volume from any previous year for the school. And if they continue, deploying this type of relentlessly tightened targeting mix, you can continue to put people into low funnel of consideration if you've done all the other stuff well. And we, to an extent, rolled out how we had done that by getting people in the awareness phase, consideration phase, and lower funnel phase with action to drive them to those landing pages and fill out forms to apply. So that is the long-winded view. I'm sure there's a ton more that we could talk about. This is for me, a pretty fascinating space. You might have gathered that I think so. But Nicole, anything else obvious that I've left off that really stuck out to you about our efforts on these programs?
The only thing was actual digital engagement for recruitment events. So getting that attendance up and sending out invites and then supporting those invites and kind of the awareness of the actual recruitment events through email marketing was pretty huge for these programs as well. But yeah, it all comes full circle.
That's a really good point. And then we'll tie this in a bow and go on to our marketing malfunction and the mazel. But that's exactly it. You have to understand, a lot of marketers fall in love in the digital space with the targeting capabilities and all the really fascinating things that we can do. But it doesn't mean that you've removed the desire for people to have the same experience that is critical to them discovering a program like this in the first place. And so, yeah, as much as we thought our content was great, we still knew that if someone was going to spend $100,000, they wanted to see somebody. They wanted to meet a person. So Nicole's point is extremely well taken. We supported a lot of the physical events as well. And in fact, increased the volume of events that they had as a result of the success of what we were driving. And they were able to do that, whereas previously it was a little bit more nebulous, where you could come and talk to somebody, and it could be for any program. They eventually got to a place where they were a lot more focused, where you could go to a learning session or an information session for one type of program. And it also allowed the university to go into different types of businesses to host those programs. It's a lot easier to get a healthcare executive if you go into a healthcare building. And it's a lot easier to get somebody who's, a global executive if you go into a global company. So great call out on that as well. The physical world was still a big part of this. So I will close my mouth and let Julia take us through the last part of this as we wrap this in a bow, as I said, the marketing malfunction of the week and the marketing mazel. What do you got for us?
So for our marketing malfunction this week, we have Roku, the streaming service. It fell short of its streaming goals for this year, for quarter two. The video streaming platform company reported 55 million active customer accounts for the quarter and 17 billion streaming hours, which sounds like an insane amount. However, the Bloomberg consensus estimate had been for 56 million active customer accounts, so a million more, and 19 billion streaming hours, so 2 billion more streaming hours, which is a lot. However, they did exceed revenue expectations with 645 million after they'd estimated 613 million. But after the market closed, after this was announced, shares had fallen 7%. So Roku kind of struggling.
What are you guys' thoughts on Roku? Like I have Roku because it was built into one of the smart TVs that we have, and that's kind of by default what I use. But that's really my exposure to Roku. I was kind of forced into it. Who are the people choosing it?
I too was forced into it because of Spectrum. So that's like the primary cable provider in the Central Florida area. I would have never considered it, but in order to gain access to Spectrum's channel, that was kind of the gimmick that they kind of rope you into getting Roku. It's that or an Apple TV. So I decided to get a Roku because it was cheaper in the concept of time. But since then, we've fully transitioned to Apple TVs around our household. But yeah, they are actually, I'm trying to Google this right now. I could have sworn that they were competing with someone else and bringing in a special competitive advantage. It's like a partnership with a network or something where it's very similar. They're the only ones that have access to that app. I'm trying to remember what it was. I read the headline a month ago. I'm not sure if you guys know what I'm talking about.
I don't, but just intrinsically, I can kind of gather that would be a competitive advantage for Roku, right? My question just was, what do they have that another doesn't? It sounds like two things. Number one, you get a smart TV and it's in there, so it's forced upon you. The other would be the ability to deliver some exclusive content that you're not going to get elsewhere because of some relationships like the one that you're referring to.
Right.
I suppose that makes sense. In the scheme of things, look, brands miss their targets all the time. It happens, right? Like business is not as predictable as we would all like it to be. But in this realm of streaming wars, it is super, super complex and competitive. The ability to hold eyeballs to me is the most important one. If you can get those streaming out, if I were Roku, the thing that would make me most nervous is not necessarily falling short on the active users, but if your users are watching your programming more than perhaps another competitor, then you have something you can duplicate. Good news for them, or anybody who holds their stock, or at least prior to the market closing, was the revenue expectations were exceeded. That's obviously a good thing, but we'll see. I don't know what the value proposition is for Roku, and perhaps I'm not alone in that, and maybe that's part of what's working against them.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar. Never seen someone with a Roku, never used a Roku. Yeah.
I would have never considered it either if I wasn't in a pinch. I was moving, there was a lot going on. So like, you know what, I'm going to get a Roku for $34.
Well,
it served its purpose.
If we have our next team party get together or whatever, if it's at Nicole's house or my house, we can show you the Roku. It'll be a fantastic experience. All right.
For our marketing mazel this week, congrats to Publicis Group, because they have teamed up with TikTok, and it is a global commerce partnership. They are the first agency partner for commerce, and the arrangement will allow the French holding company's clients exclusive access to new shopping features and products on TikTok, as well as additional research from the platform.
So what does that look like? So like the clients, in terms of additional research and features, like what are the clients getting a little more specifically?
Yeah, so they'll have access to a cross-functional support and coaching on community commerce best practices from a dedicated TikTok team. They'll have the ability to test new commercial products ahead of other brands, and they'll get exclusive data. What that data is was not specified, but knowing TikTok, I'm sure it's a lot of data.
Although I'm always skeptical of something that's labeled as cross-functional and best practices all in the same sentence. So that could mean everything and nothing. But what I do know is an advantage, because TikTok is the hottest thing right now. And even us, like when we're reaching out to new prospective clients, even if we are great at Facebook or YouTube or Google or whatever, part of their gut is probably telling them, yeah, but we've been doing this for a while. Like you can't be that much better than we are. But TikTok is still that one thing where there's enough brands and agencies who have not done the work yet, that if it's a huge leg up for Publicis Group or Publicis, I guess I'm not sure exactly how they're saying it these days, for the brands that want to really know what's going on with TikTok, they might choose an agency under this umbrella first, if they know that they're getting some sort of access and insight or education or whatever into how you can do the best work with TikTok. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Publicis and frankly for TikTok to have better relationships with agencies under one of the huge parent companies is obviously good for them too, because if they're the darling of the agency world, agencies are going to prioritize funneling ad dollars to them as well, and everybody wins. So be interested to see if it's beyond skin deep and there's actually a real perk to agencies that are partnering with under Publicis with TikTok, if they really do get a leg up, or if it's just nice and we talk about it.
Yeah, what I think would be interesting to see is, and what I see on TikTok, just on my For You page, is a lot of content creators struggle with being banned, being content banned, being comment banned, post banned on TikTok. And it seems like the TikTok, both influencer universe and advertising universe, which obviously overlap, is pretty complicated. And it seems like even the influencers don't really understand how it works, and they don't have the connection to TikTok to get that insight, even people with millions of followers on the platform. So it'll be interesting to see if, Publicis can tie, or offer something to their clients with their influencers with more assurance that these influencers will have the success that they should.
Right. Yeah. Kind of peel back the mystery behind why they're getting shadow banned.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. Well, that's what we had for you this week on the Marketing Moment with DB Dynamo. Thanks again for listening. We are slowly but surely growing an audience here. So for those of you who are a part of it, we're grateful to you. We encourage you to share it with your peers if you got something useful out of this. And if you haven't yet, we would encourage you to subscribe to what it is that you're listening to, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And we look forward to talking to you again every Tuesday. So don't forget to come back and join us then, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks again.